So what science center are you from?
From the Loon Preservation Committee.
And where is
In
that?
Molten.
Oh,
So
what?
far away from the Loon Center. That's where
Do you know what I haven't? I've been over to in Ashland.
let me, so we're only a hop, skip, and a jump away from Ashland.
Well, Ashland's 24, and you have to go across. Don't you have to go across the mountain to Molten Road?
To Molten Road, you go from here about more 25 feet.
Yeah.
That's the whole road,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, and then go up 25.
It's not a huge road. Yeah.
No, I know.
You can
Yeah.
get there.
My father grew up in Ashland.
Oh, sure, yeah.
So, and some people saying Lake Wasaki, and then that makes sense for Lowborough
Yeah.
versus,
I was going to say,
yeah. Because
Yeah.
I'm thinking, well,
Yeah.
the science is one thing about science in the
It's
Lake.
in Holderness, right?
Yeah.
Science in Holderness. I actually live in Ashland.
Really?
So that's my
Oh,
commute
okay.
through Holderness, the Loon Center's on the north shore of Williamstown. Yeah, it's right in the market station.
He's a Lowborough.
I thought we moved from there for Gideon,
It might have been, in fact.
But it wouldn't be Swan.
Yeah.
So my father grew up actually in Hampton, but it was on this side, so it was just over the border, you know, where Dana Hill is. Yeah, and then it goes up to Scotch.
Yes,
Yeah,
it's
so
okay.
he was right there at the bottom of the hill. His parents owned
Now, we didn't have fear on it.
Yeah.
I think it closed down here we used to go.
This is good. So you had some experience.
I think.
Well,
I'm happy to take it around like that. I think we're.
I've been on last species. Any houses around here. Right. Yeah.
Somebody said, is this true? Somebody said, they saw
They can. Yeah, they can, you know, loons can coordinate neighbors, so if you've got the answer of that little thing, they can see them as potential, you know, competitors for resources of the lake and things, and they've been known, you know, to chase a duck and brood of ducklings right out of the water, or even still one or two. Yeah.
that's what my friend said.
Yeah. I'm sure, I'm sure. Yeah. Good.
All right.
Thank you for coming. Yes, and there's a bunch, everybody, there's a bunch of stuff here on Loon, so before or after, during, any time, if you want to come out. Good.
All right. So, good evening, everyone. Welcome to Superstellar Friday. My name is Amanda. I'm one of our education coordinators. If you're repeat visitors to this, you may have seen me controlling the Zoom many a times in this little corner. But I'd love to introduce Harry Vogel this evening as our guest speaker for the evening. He's the executive director of the Loon Preservation Committee, has done 30 plus years of work studying loons, and he's going to tell us a little bit more about what loons are, some of the challenges facing them, and also the work that the Loon Preservation Committee does to protect these wonderful creatures. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to
Great.
Harry for the evening. So
All right, thank you, Amanda. Yeah, thank you, and thanks for the invitation. I need to call out a special guest sitting right there in the back corner is Kelly Duckworth, who used to be the Loon Center manager. And so before that, she studied ospreys. So I was just thinking, she's gone from like ospreys to loons to the universe, and I don't know what her next challenge will be, like maybe alternate dimensions or time travel or something like that, right? Yes. Okay, there you go. Good. so it's great to be here tonight, and thank you all for coming out. So I'd like to do a few different things this evening. First, just talk about loons, right, and what makes loons unique and special and maybe worth preserving. Then talk about the challenges that are facing loons here in New Hampshire, and that leads very naturally to the Loon Preservation Committee and the reasons why that organization was created and the work that we're doing to try and keep these birds common here in New Hampshire. So, what do we think about the lights? Can we try it with the lights?
Would everyone be comfortable if we made it a little bit darker in here? Yeah? Okay, we can definitely do that.
Good.
We're gonna leave the doors open in the back as well, just for a little bit of ambient light so we can see the exits and those kinds of things.
Awesome. Good, good. See, that's better. Good, good. 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 So I am a biologist by training, and in the realm of biology, just like any other human endeavor, the work that we do over our careers is always based on the work that others have done before. So, in the world of loons, one of those people to stand out was Judy McAuliffe-Shepard. And Judy was one of the first people to really study loons and people and the interactions between those two species. And in addition to being a great researcher, Judy was also a little bit of a philosopher. She referred to loons and their calls as a symbol of wilderness, and a positive affirmation of wild things and wild places and wild sounds in the night. And so loons have really come to typify the nature experience for a lot of outdoors people, and there are good reasons for that. These are impressive birds, right? And so sometimes people will come into the loon center and they'll say, oh, I had no idea they were so big. And a full-grown male loon, and here in New Hampshire, can be 15, sometimes 16 pounds in size. A lot of times people don't realize that they're such a big bird because, for one thing, they're a very dense bird. And so as they're on the water, like an iceberg, most of them is below the surface, right, where you can't see them. And now, as well, if we're just watching them out in the water, a lot of times there's nothing there to really give us a sense of scale for these birds. But they have that striking black and white plumage, they have those blood red eyes, and they have these distinctive and far-ranging calls. And one of my very favorite loon quotes comes from a British researcher who way back in the 1950s described the nighttime calling of loons as a chorus from all of the devils in hell. So whether you love it or it sends chills up and down your spine, you're not likely to forget it or the bird that made it. Then, if you have a little chick like this one riding in the back of his parents, and you've hooked a fair proportion of your population, right? So people who are not bird watchers couldn't tell the difference between a house finch and a house sparrow, but they know and care about their loons, and that makes loons a powerful force for conservation. So the pictures that you've seen up until now have all been of the common loon, and as the name implies, it's the most common of the loon species. It's the most widespread loon. It's the only loon that actually breeds here in New Hampshire, but there are actually 5 species of loons. So this is the yellow-billed loon. The chief difference is that namesake, the yellow bill, but these are breeders of the high Arctic, so the very, the Arctic regions of Alaska and northern Canada. And this is a Pacific loon, and this is much smaller than the yellow-billed loon or the common loon, only about half the size. It's more widespread, though, than the yellow-billed loon. Again, though, this is a breeder of the far north, so the tundra and the taiga regions of Alaska and northern Canada as well. Just wanted to just check the focus on this just a little bit. All right, let's see what that does. And then this is the Arctic loon. And if you're thinking that this looks very much like the Pacific loon that we just saw, it's because they are actually very closely related, so closely related that up until 1985, biologists considered them to be one and the same species. And it was only based on very small differences in the plumage and the body shape that we actually separated these things out into 2 different species. And the genetic work, confirmed that. We looked at the genes of these birds as well. So this is mostly a Eurasian bird, but we have found some small populations in the very northern tip of Alaska, so we can also claim it as a North American breed. And then this is the red-throated loon. So this is the smallest of all of our loons, least loon-like of our loons, probably branched off from the rest of the loon family pretty early on in that evolution. This is the only loon that can take off directly from land without a long running start over water. This is common for our common loons. Again, this is also a far northern species in terms of its breeding, but this is the only other loon that you're likely to see in New Hampshire. Because even though they breed in the far north, they overwinter off of our coast. So if you're off at Odeon Point Science Center looking out over the ocean, in and amongst those common loons, you may see an occasional red-throated loon. So this is not a loon. This is a duck. It's a male common merganser, to be exact. And every year at the Loon Preservation Committee, we get reports of a loon with a dozen little babies. And we tell these people, that's a great wildlife sighting, but it wasn't a loon, because loons have only 1 or 2 chicks. And sometimes, people get really irate, right? And they say, now look, I've lived in the Lakes region all my life. I know a loon when I see one, and that was a loon with 12 little babies, So we thank them for those reports, and then quietly, vertical file those, and don't go back to them again. But I can see why there could be a mistake in identification for these birds. Because like a loon, this is a diving, fish-eating bird. Right? It's got that same black and white pattern here as well, but there are several distinctive differences too. So these are only, male common merganser is only about half the size of a common loon. It sits much higher out of the water, so it's showing a lot more white along the sides. It doesn't have that checkerboard pattern along the back, or given that I'm at the planetarium, I should describe it as stars in a night sky, right, instead of a checkerboard, because I want to know my audience here. But it doesn't have the necklace marking, and then there's that, which is bright red, instead of the black or dark gray of the loon. And in addition to those very obvious differences, there are more differences, because the skeleton and musculature is all very different in a merganser or in a duck from the loon. So the fastest way to annoy a loon researcher is to call them ducks or wolf, because they're actually neither one of those two things. So if loons are not ducks, not even closely related to ducks, does anybody in the audience want to hazard a guess? Any brave souls want to take a chance and say what they think is the closest living relative to a loon? Not you, Kelly. Any takers? Any guesses? Would you believe? Yeah. So, this surprises some people, right? But other people say, well, they have that same kind of formal black and white, coloration, so there are some similarities. Obviously, though, some pretty distinct differences as well. One of those is that penguins are flightless. And if you've ever gone to the New England Aquarium, seen that great penguin display that they have, you know that penguins actually, when they're swimming underwater, they use those wings, which have been so highly modified, they're no good at all for moving them through the air, but they're actually swimming by flying underwater, right, with their wings. Even that is very different from our loons, because they don't use their wings, they use their big red feet to move around underwater. Other distinct differences, though, in the skeleton again, and the musculature and things, but the topper, though, for me, is that loons are entirely a bird of the northern hemisphere, whereas penguins are found, at least wild-living penguins, are found only south of the equator. So we probably have to go back a long way to find a common ancestor to these two birds. And then the story gets even stranger, because the other closely related groups of birds are the tube-nosed swimmers. And those are the albatrosses, the petrels, and the shearwaters. So here's a wandering albatross. Here's this graceful, soaring bird that spends most of its life riding currents of air, over the ocean. And I'm trying to tell you, good folks, this evening, that they're actually pretty closely related to our stubby-winged little loons, right? That can barely take off, from the water, it seems. But here again, genes come to the rescue. It's way back now, in 1983, a couple of geneticists, Sibley and Alquist, did this genetic assay of all of the living species of birds. And what he found is that these three groups, the loons, the penguins, the tube-nosed swimmers, grouped out pretty close to each other and fairly distinct from all of these other groups of birds. And so, so there's one other thing too that makes us feel better about this unlikely grouping. That's a lifestyle characteristic, and that's the ocean. So all three of these groups of birds have an intimate connection with the ocean. And in fact, we tend to think of loons as freshwater birds that go to overwinter on the ocean. It's actually just as correct, maybe more correct, to think of loons as ocean birds that come to fresh water only to breed. So I'll talk a little bit about the lifestyle of loons. So loons are fish-eating birds. Any of us who spent any time around the lake are very cognizant and aware of another fish-eating bird, the great blue heron, right? But herons and loons go about that business of catching their fish in very different ways. So a heron is a classic ambush predator. So they'll do their best to stand absolutely still, and they'll wait for a fish or a frog to swim by, and then they'll snap it up. Loons, in contrast, are very active predators. So they will actually peer beneath the surface of the water. They're looking for a fish or a school of fish swimming around down there. When they see those, they'll dive down and they'll give chase to those fish. Sometimes people ask me what the favorite food of a loon is. Turns out loons have very few taste buds, so there's no evidence that they're picking their food based on any kind of taste preference. But I always say it's probably the fish themselves that determine whether or not they're going to be caught by a loon. Because if a loon is diving after one of our the cold water species, right, the torpedo shapes, so like the trout or the landlocked salmon, their method of escaping from a loon, if it's being chased, is to put on a burst of speed and head straight down into that cold, dark part of the lake. And that's where loons can't easily be followed. But any of these warm water species, and that includes, yellow perch or a sunfish, a catfish, any of our minnows, if they're being pursued by a loon or any other predator, their method of trying to escape is to zigzag like crazy at the surface of the lake. And loons are so maneuverable that every time that fish zigs or zags, the loon can kind of cut the corner, on it until it's close enough to reach out with its bill. And most of the time, those fish are swallowed underwater. We never even get a chance to see what it is that they're eating. But there's two exceptions to that. One is that if a loon catches a catfish, those are really spiny, so you want to make sure they go down the right way, right? So a loon will often bring that to the surface and manipulate it so that it makes sure it's going down head first. And then this loon, which is probably on its way to feed this fish to win its chase. So here's a shot of a loon swimming underwater. These are awfully hard to come by. A couple of adaptations that I want to talk about. One is really obvious, right? And that's that the legs of this bird are exiting the body right at the very end of the body. So that placement of their legs is all wrong for walking. Center of gravity is way, way off, but it makes them hugely efficient swimmers. So just like putting a propeller at the back of a boat, this means that they can move through the water quickly, and with ease and very efficient. The adaptation that you can't see on this picture is that the bones of loons are very dense. And if any of you have ever tried to dive below the surface of the water, wearing water wings or any kind of flotation, which often works by trapping bubbles of air, that's not a great strategy if you want to spend any amount of time under water. So these really dense bones of loons, and some people in some books will even say, oh, loons have solid bones. Actually not true, they're not solid, but they have much thicker walls, and they have much less of an air space, in those bones. And so that increases the density of a loon until they can achieve almost neutral buoyancy, right? So it means that it's easy for a loon to stay under the water for traveling purposes or for diving and catching fish while expending a minimum of. Another shot of a loon swimming underwater, and I show this just to show that all of the propulsion and the steering comes from these huge webbed feet, and the wings of that loon are held tight right up against the bottom. So when a loon is swimming, those wings actually do nothing except create a little bit of extra drag. And for that reason, the wings of loons are really small in proportion to their body. That combination of a dense, heavy body and these short, kind of stubby wings means that loons have one of the highest wing loadings of any flying bird. And so there's an aeronautical term, right? But all it means is that essentially every square inch of a loon's wing has to hold aloft more body weight than almost any other flying bird. So they're second only to swans in North America. And that's why you'll often see that a long running start across the surface of the water to get enough air flowing over those little wings to lift that heavy body off of the lake. So loons will naturally orient in. If they have a headwind, they'll orient into the wind and take off just like an airliner would. But on a dead calm day, it can be up to a quarter of a mile of a runway before that loon can get it. Here's another shot of a loon. This one has pretty much achieved takeoff at this point. But every once in a while, especially on a small lake, you may see a loon take off and then make a couple of circuits of that lake before it ends up flying off in one direction or another. And those circuits aren't a scenic tour on the part of that bird. Every time it makes a circuit around the lake, it's gaining a few precious feet of altitude until it can clear the trees at the water's edge. Once they're up, though, that flight is swift and direct, and a flying loon will beat its wings about 4 times a second, and that's enough to propel it along with steady speed and level flight of up to 80 miles an hour. So there's a couple of pieces of old hunter folklore in the late 1800s. One was that if you saw a loon and it was floating on the surface of the lake and you shot at it, the loon would see the flash from the rifle and be able to dive into the water before the bullet reached it. And another is that if a loon was flying away from you, you could shoot at the loon, but the shot from your shotgun would not overtake the loon. And I think a lot of loons lost their lives testing those tools. We don't do that anymore. So the placement of those legs so far back on the body of the loon means that loons are almost helpless on them. They really can't walk at all. They can just kind of push themselves along on their fronts. And that's one reason why a loon's nest is always built right next to the lake. That's about all they have in common, though, because the nest can range from a pretty elaborate structure, like this one, made up of mud and various types of vegetation, to sometimes just a scrape in the sand. And they can be right out in the open, like this one is, or they can be pretty well hidden. A lot of times we don't think of this black and white speckling in a loon's back as camouflage, but if they're nesting under dappled sunlight, because of overlying shrubbery and things, it can actually work pretty well to break up the outline of that bird. 2 eggs are laid in the nest. They're olive drab, brownish in color with these black speckles, and that camouflages them against the nest material. That can be important because at the very beginning of incubation, loons will sometimes leave those eggs untended, for even hours at a time. But as incubation progresses, it becomes more and more important to the embryo developing inside of that egg to have a constant body temperature. And the loons have also invested more time and energy into those eggs. So by the end of incubation, they're spending about 99% of their time sitting on those eggs. A little bit larger than a chicken egg. Probably make a heck of an omelet, but we don't do that by the Loon Preservation Committee. And both adults spend equal time, in just about every phase of chick rearing. And that includes incubating the eggs, it includes feeding and protecting the chicks as well. So a nest exchange tends to happen maybe every 4 to 6 hours, although that can vary widely from individual to individual. And whenever a nest exchange happens, they use that opportunity to roll the eggs. And rolling that egg allows fresh oxygen in, it flushes bad gases out, and it keeps the embryo from sticking to one side of the egg. Then, after about 27 or 28 days, you have a little chick. If there were 2 eggs laid, and usually there are, not always, then the second chick will usually hatch. The eggs are laid probably about 3 days apart, and the chicks tend to hatch within a day or so. So here are a couple of little loon chicks. These are only a day or 2 old, and their first coat of very dark brown. So you can see, this little chick isn't going to fly anytime soon, right? Those little wing buds are not very developed. But those legs and feet are ready for action, so they can swim as soon as they are born. And despite that, you'll often see this, a couple of chicks riding up in the back of one of their parents. So we think that there are a couple of reasons why loons do this. And one is that cold water can suck heat out of a tiny body very quickly. So it helps these loon chicks to thermoregulate and maintain a constant and a good body temperature. The other thing is that a lot of things will eat a loon chick if they can get it. So that includes a large fish, a snapping turtle, or an eagle. So overall, it's just the safest place for these chicks to be, right in the back. Chicks grow up pretty fast, so these are a couple of weeks old at this point. They've molted into that second coat of downy plumage. It's kind of a more mousy brown-gray color. By the time they're 7 weeks old, you can see here, there's some juvenile feathers growing in there. You can see them at the top of the head. So these are the feathers that will eventually give shape and contour to the body and allow for longer dives underwater and even allow for flight. And then at 10 weeks old, they look pretty recognizably like our majestic loons, at least in profile. So the black and white coloration is not going to happen for another 2 years for this chick. So it's about, loons are typically about 26 months old before they first molt into that black and white, those black and white feathers, which we actually call the alternate or the breeding plumage. So this is the juvenile plumage, but it looks very much like the basic plumage. So they're going to be looking like this for the next 2 years. At 10 weeks old, those feathers are now grown in right on the wings. And they're working on creating those flight muscles that are required. So they're not quite flying yet, but you'll see them doing these rushes along the way. And at this age, they're also perfectly able to feed themselves, but it's always easier to beg from your parents for a little while. And then by 12 or 13 weeks, they're flighted, so they're able to fly. At this point, we consider them to be fledged, even though for the rest of the summer, certainly they're going to stick to their natal lake pretty closely. So their parents are there, they know where the good fishing is, this is where they come flee. And then by fall, right, by October, certainly as our leaves are turning, our loons are beginning to think about migrating to the ocean. At this point, the chicks are pretty much their adult size. The adults are beginning to molt out of that black and white alternate or breeding plumage into the basic winter plumage, which is a lot like that juvenile plumage, and it can be hard to tell them apart. So, the needs of loons are really pretty simple when you think about it. So they are diving, fish-eating loons. So they need clean, clear water to catch the fish that they need to eat, and they need calm and quiet places to incubate their eggs and to raise their young. And it's when one or more of those things are missing that our loons get into trouble. The large lakes that these birds claim as their breeding territories are also, unfortunately, the endpoints for many of our toxins. And one of those toxins that Loon Preservation Committee has been studying for a lot of years now is mercury. Turns out that our loons here in the Northeast have some of the highest levels of mercury anywhere in North America. So, and that's as measured in unhatched loon eggs taken from failed nests, and those are the green bars, and also the blood of live captured loons, and those are the yellow bars. So where does this mercury come from? So mercury is a commonly, occurring element, and it's present pretty much everywhere, but in incredibly minute quantities. And so, because mercury is an element, it's also present in coal. But the mercury that's present and bound up in that coal is safely locked up below the surface of the Earth, where it can't do much harm to living things until we mine that mercury, or that coal rather, bring it up to the surface, and then burn it to create electricity. Because mercury is an element, it's hard to destroy, so it survives that combustion process. It goes up the smokestack, and then it comes right back up into our lakes and ponds. The other thing about mercury is that it's the only metal that's a liquid at room temperature. So that has meant that it has been useful for things like thermometers and for compact fluorescent light bulbs and electrical switches, batteries, right, it used to be. And when those consumer goods have outlived their usefulness, if we dispose of them improperly by just throwing them into the garbage, they go to a landfill, or even worse, to an incinerator, and then up the smokestack, and then right back down. Right? And so the areas in New Hampshire where we have found the highest levels of mercury in loon eggs and loon blood are all downwind from coal-fired power plants or municipal waste incinerators. And that's important because mercury is a potent neurotoxin. So as little as 1.3 parts per million of mercury can kill an embryo developing inside of the embryo. Now we've pulled eggs off of some lakes in New Hampshire with more than 4 parts per million of mercury. So there's no question that this is affecting our loon population. Another issue for loons is shoreline development and the things that go with shoreline development. And so, loons like to nest on islands. We humans also like to nest on islands or otherwise change natural shorelines. And when we do that, we can displace these loons from their traditional historical nesting spots. Another problem, because loons have to nest right next to the water, is that sometimes we move the water on them, right? And so sometimes if we draw down the level of a lake for power control or for power production or for flood control, we can take a loon that was nesting really happily right at the water's edge. Suddenly we've dropped the lake level on them, by 3 or 4 feet. Sometimes that can expose 10 or 12 feet of muddy, rocky shore, and that can be too far for a loon to go to get back to its nest. The opposite is also true, and it certainly was last summer. If we have a really rainy summer and water levels, suddenly come up on our lakes, we can flood a loon nest, and that combined with a motorboat going by too fast and creating a wave can wash a loon nest or a loon egg right out of the nest. So the close approach of boats, right, can also flush a loon off of the nest. So if you look carefully at this loon on the right-hand side of the picture, its neck is up and it's looking around. So that loon is actually pretty relaxed still, even though those motors are pretty close to it. If they got much closer, you would see this, that head coming down, laying down flat across the nest. We didn't have a name for this, we call it the hungover posture, but this loon is trying to make itself inconspicuous, and it's also from this posture, if we approach it any closer, it can explode off of that nest, and get into the water to save itself. But in doing so, it can actually break its eggs, or it can kick its eggs out of the nest into the water as well. And the good news is, if you've ever flushed a loon off the nest, if you turn around and leave the area right away, the chances are pretty good that within 20 or 30 minutes, that bird will get back, come back to it, get back onto the nest. The problem, though, is that if it's a really hot day, those eggs can cook on the nest. If it's a cold and rainy day, they can chill, right? Either one of those extremes will kill the embryo developing inside that egg, and it also leaves those eggs exposed to heavy predators that are working the shoreline or flying overhead and looking for an easy meal. And there are plenty of those predators around, as well. So prime suspects numbers 1 and 2 in New Hampshire are probably raccoons and mink, but any of our scavenging animals, and that includes a fox, a bear, a coyote, a skunk, a possum, any of those animals will take a loon egg if they come across it, on undefended nest. And we also have avian predators, of loon eggs, and those include gulls, crows, and eagles. Eagles will also take loon chicks, and they've even actually been known to take an adult loon. In the past, most of those occurrences of eagles taking on adult loons and killing them and eating them have happened in the Midwest, and those loons are only about 1/2 to 2/3 the size of our much bigger, beefier loons here in the Northeast. But as eagle populations have increased at a far higher rate than loon populations have recovered, we're finding more and more of those incidents here in New Hampshire. So, and once hatched, these loon chicks are not out of danger either, because these chicks are small, and they're dark, and they're buoyant. So every year we lose a number of them to collisions with boats and jet skis. Right? People either don't see them, or they see them, but they expect that they'll be able to dive out of it. And these little chicks are so buoyant, they're like little corks, on the water, and so they can't dive out of the way. And too many people, too close to loons, can also harm the loon family as well. So one of the things, of course, when these loon chicks hatch, we all want to get in just a little bit closer to these loons, right, and share in that intimate moment in a loon family. The problem is, if we get too close to these birds, they stop doing what they're doing, which is feeding and protecting that chick, which is what they need to be doing, and they begin to focus on us instead as a threat coming in into their, into the confines of their loon family. So what will they do? They'll begin to focus on us, and they may actually turn and swim away, right, to put a little bit more space between them and us. So then what do some people do? Well, a little bit harder, right, to get back to, that area. And sometimes the unfortunate thing is that, I tell people all the time, it's a full-time job for 2 loon parents to raise 2 chicks over the course of the summer. And we need to let them to do that. And so if you want to get a close-up look at a loon chick, a loon family in the water, there's only one way to do that, and that's with a good pair of binoculars, right? If you want to get a picture of them, put the iPhones away and get yourself a telephoto lens, right, so that you can get that beautiful wildlife photo. And the problem, sometimes I see people doing slow circuits around the lake, just kind of pursuing these loons, with a little iPhone and out and trying to get a picture. And I always think to myself, the picture that you're getting is the butt end of the loon, and that's not a great wildlife photo. So I don't know why people insist on doing that. Every once in a while, someone will come into the loon center and they'll say, "Oh, the loons were dancing for us." And I'm always kind of surprised, that people don't recognize this is an animal in great distress, right? So the person who took this photo was way too close to this one. And all of that frothing and all of that activity is meant to distract our attention because they think of us as a potential predator at that point, away from its nest or its chicks or its meat. So they need to be spending their time doing other things besides displaying this for art. Another problem for loons is monofilament lines. You can see right there, pain from this. And so loons and other wildlife can become entangled in monofilament because they don't have opposable thumbs. If they find themselves tangled up in that line, they'll try and work it out with their bill. And what can happen is their bill can become entirely wired shut with that line. So birds that are afflicted that way, they can't feed themselves anymore, and they can actually die from a combination of starvation and exposure if we can't get out there and rescue those birds. So every year we have a number of these calls, and most of them we can rescue, and remove that line, but not all of them. So some of them So a lot of issues, right, facing our loons here in Hampshire, none bigger than this one. Lead fishing tackle is a huge problem for our loons. So when we talk about a lead-headed fishing jig, that's just a sinker where the hook is molded right into the sinker, so it's an integral part of that tackle, right? So loons can ingest fishing tackle in one of 3 ways. So loons have no teeth, and when you think about it, that makes all sorts of sense. If you're a flying animal, the last thing that you want is a bunch of heavy calcium objects right at the front of your body, right? It's going to make it hard to fly straight and level, and you're more likely to nosedive into the ground. So loons and other flying birds lost those teeth early on in evolution, and so they swallow their food whole. But then they have to find out a way to break up that food so it turns into digestible pieces. And they'll actually forage along the lake bottom for little pebbles, and they'll swallow those pebbles and they'll hold those in the gizzard, the muscular portion of their stomach, and they'll use those as surrogate teeth to grind up the fish as they just eat. That's something that served loons well for millions of years, but in the past couple of 100 years, they've begun to pick up, instead of these pebbles, these small split-shot sinkers, right, that litter the lakes, the bottoms of some of our lakes. And these little sinkers are about the same size, and they look about the same as some of these pebbles that they're looking for. But the problem is, once they swallow that sinker, rather than passing it through their body, they hold onto it. And then the grinding action of the gizzard and the stomach acids dissolve that lead and can go throughout the body and cause lead poisoning. We used to think that was the primary way in which loons swallowed the lead sinker and then subsequently died of lead poisoning. But now we think there are 2 other ways that are actually more common. So a typical prey item for a loon, probably like a 6 or an 8-inch yellow perch, pretty small fish. But on occasion, loons can pursue and capture a larger fish. When we're looking at something more than an 8-inch yellow perch, you're beginning to talk about a size of fish that can conceivably break an angler's line. And when that line breaks, that fish is going to be trailing that line and a hook and a sinker, right, or a lead-headed jig as fish is going to be swimming a little bit erratically, a little bit slower than the fish next to it, and that's the fish the loon is going to zero in on as an easy meal. And when it gets the fish, it gets the hook and the line and so forth. And then finally, if you're fishing, you're trying to catch a fish, but a loon's instinct is to strike at something that flashes through the water. So you could actually catch a loon instead. So the good news here, there's almost always good news, parts of this, because there's always something that we can do about these issues as well. The good news is, if that sinker or jig is made of anything other than lead, and there's a number of different things that we can make sinkers and jigs out. So there's steel, tin, bismuth, tungsten, rubber, stone, these new composite materials. Any of those things a loon can swallow and it will be just fine. But the smallest little split shot that you can think of, if it's made of lead, will kill that bird within 2 to 4 weeks. So we're not asking people to stop fishing, but we are asking them to go through, the old fishing tackle boxes. If you've got Grandpa's old fishing tackle box in the dusty corner of the garage, I guarantee you it's full of lead tackle. And we even we're even trying to help you to get rid of that, because we've gotten so tired of finding dead loons or finding loons that we need to euthanize because they've been lead poisoned. We are actually paying people to give us their lead tackle. So if you go to loonsafe.org, we have a lead tackle buyback program, and you can get a $10 voucher for bringing in lead to any of these tackle shops, and we have about 15 of them that throughout the state that are working with us, and use it to buy new loon-safe, non-lead. So back in 1975, people began to notice that loons were becoming less common on our lakes. And the thinking at that time was that if human activities had contributed to those declines, and it seemed pretty likely that they had, that human activities, if they were coordinated and thoughtful, could reverse those declines. And that's the hope and the philosophy on which the Loon Preservation Committee was created. So our mission comes in 3 parts. The first is to restore and maintain a healthy population of loons throughout the state of New Hampshire. We also want to monitor the health and the productivity of loon populations as indicators of environmental quality, the health of our lakes and ponds, and we want to promote a greater understanding and a wider appreciation of loons and also the larger nature. So this is our headquarters, the Loon Center in Moultonborough. This is a headquarters and a visitor center. We have a gift shop and staff offices and a research laboratory there. But we carry out programs of monitoring and research and management and education throughout the entire state. And we're helped in that effort by close to 1,000 volunteers throughout the state. So these were 2 of our newer volunteers. These 2 girls decided to open up a lemonade stand and donate the profits to the Loon Preservation Committee. And the great thing is, the same day that they came to the Loon Center to empty, their tins into our donation boxes, they ran into 2 other girls who independently had been doing the same thing on another lake in New Hampshire. So I think this Lemonade for Loons thing is taking off, and we'll see what we can do. And we also have a small but dedicated staff. So every year we hire a number of seasonal field biologists. This is our crew for 2024, and they go out and help us do all of our general work on lakes throughout New Hampshire. So we don't pay these folks much, but we house them. This was actual staff housing in the Marcus Sanctuary. My favorite comment on these cabins was they're a little bit like Thoreau's cabin in the woods, but without all the bells and whistles. But I'm very happy to say that since then, they've gotten an upgrade. So this is our new Kitty and John Wilson Field Operations Center, and this entire 2nd floor here is new housing for our field staff, so which I think that they very much appreciate it, especially when we show them photos of the old times. And so together, our members and our volunteers and our staff do several different things. The first thing that we do is we count loons. And counting loons is our first indication of problems with our loon population, and it's the ultimate measure of our success in trying to keep these birds calm. So we've been counting these birds since 1975, and over that span of time, we've actually created the longest running and the most complete data set of loons and loon populations and productivity that exists anywhere in the world right here in New Hampshire. So every year, we're on about 350 lakes or more in New Hampshire. And not all of those lakes have loons on them, but all of them have the potential to have loons. We hope that more of them will have loons in the future. So we deal with that large number of lakes by carving the state up into these different monitoring regions, and we assign a biologist to each one of these regions, including our two largest lakes, Willamette and Pisaki, and we work with the Magog Wildlife Refuge to census loons up there. It's one thing to say our loon populations are increasing or decreasing, but we also want to know what are the factors that are contributing to changes in those populations. And so we do research of various kinds. And one of those research activities is banding loons. And we band loons because despite their popularity, there's still an awful lot that we don't know about these birds. So all the time I get tagged with an easy question that I should be able to answer, right? Something like, well, how long do loons live? And all I can say is, I don't know. Nobody knows. 25 or 30 years is our best guess as an average, lifespan in the world. But do loons mate for life? Do they come back to the same lake year after year? What's their age at first breeding? What's their reproductive output over their lifetime? Where do our loons in New Hampshire go in the wintertime? And what are the migratory pathways that they use to go back and forth? Do the chicks come back at the same lake, the same general area? Up until very recently, the answers to all of those questions were either unknown or based on really limited data. And so to find out the answers to those questions, we go out in the middle of the night and we put bands, we capture these loons for a short period of time, and then we put bands on them. And I'll hand these around as well. Every loon that we ban is an aluminum U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service band, and each one of these bands is a unique serial number. So you can think about this like as a social security number, right, for a loon. The problem is, as soon as you get a foot away, we can't read those little numbers anymore. And so that's why we also put these very lightweight plastic bands. So every loon that we ban gets a unique combination of bands. So there'll only be one loon anywhere in New Hampshire, anywhere in North America for that matter, that has, say, a red over a blue dot on the left leg and a yellow stripe over a silver band, on the right leg. And once we've banded that loon, we can begin to follow that loon over its lifetime and begin to get answers to all those questions. So I'll hand these around. You'll see they're very lightweight. It's nothing for a loon to be carrying these bands. As long as we have a loon in the hand, we draw a small sample of blood. We test that blood for lead, for mercury, for other contaminants, for stress-indicating hormones, for blood parasites. We can do genetics work on that blood. We can look at liver and kidney function. So we can learn an awful lot about the health of that bird just by drawing that small sample of blood. We also clip a couple of feathers. And with those feathers, we can look at mercury. We can do genetics work on the feathers as well. We've even looked at cyanobacteria toxins in feathers. So this little chick is too small to ban. So we're not going to take blood, we're not going to take any feathers from that chick, we're not going to ban this bird. But when we're out there in the middle of the night capturing these loons, when we capture the adults, we capture the chicks as well so that we keep the family unit together and we can release them all together again on the lake. And of course, banding is exciting work, and sometimes accidents happen. We also work to rescue loons in trouble when that can be done safely, or at least reasonably safely. So this is John Cooley, our senior biologist, very gingerly, pushing a canoe across very thin ice to get a loon that found itself trapped on the ice because it waited too long to migrate and lost its watery runway. Here's how that loon repaid John. Took a pretty good bite out of him. Yeah. So there's actually a story behind this loon because John had banded this loon earlier that summer, and it had given them such a fight when he brought it into the canoe that it nearly tipped the canoe. Then it was a year or two after that, we got a report of a loon acting strangely, on one of our lakes. We went out to pick up this loon and to rescue that loon. And when we got that loon, we saw that it was banded, and it turns out this is the same loon that took a chunk out of John. Yeah, so with some of these birds, we have quite a long, history. we get to know them pretty good as individuals. So, and loons that are not so lucky, the ones that we can't rescue, those go to Mark Hopris, who's a veterinary pathologist, or at least they did. So, and we've been doing this since 1985 or so. We've been sending dead loons to Mark so that he can tell us what they died of. And this turns out to be really important, because if we can find out what's killing individual loons, we can get a good sense of what's affecting loons on a population scale. So this, for example, is how we found out about the issue of lead sinkers and lead jigs, by doing these necropsies, which are animal autopsies, essentially. We also collect unhatched loon eggs from failed nests, and we can test those eggs for embryo development, for eggshell thickness. We can look at contaminants in those loon eggs as well. We can even archive these eggs and eggshell fragments so that we can, down the line, we can look for things that we haven't even thought of today. More on those contaminants as well. And then we also work to really try and minimize human impacts on loons. So one of the things that we'll do is float these loon nesting rafts on lakes throughout the state. So these rafts can help loons on lakes with changing water levels because they float, so they're anchored at each side, but there's enough slack that as water levels go up and down, these rafts can go up and down as well. They can also help loons on lakes that are so developed that there's no natural spots left for a loon to try. So last year we floated more than 150 of these rafts, and 1 out of every 4 chicks hatched in New Hampshire came from a raft.
So they really use them.
Yeah, yeah. They don't always take to them. Only about half the rafts we float ever get used. So there's some loons that look at these things and go like, nope, not getting on that thing. But the ones that can use it can be pretty successful. We also float signs around nesting loons. So last year we protected 127, I think, nesting pairs with these signs just to give these loons a little bit of space to be able to incubate those eggs and hatch those chicks successfully. Most of the signs that we use are kind of small and polite, like this one, Loon Nesting Sanctuary, please stay away. These are the ones we use on Winnipesaukee. A little bit larger, a little bit more to the point, but we do what we need to do to give these birds a little bit of space. Then we also post educational signs at lake access points. And we do these, we put up these signs because once a loon has been hit by a boat or jet ski, or tangled up in monofilament line, or swallowed a lead sinker or lead-headed jig, there's often not a lot that we can do to save that bird. And with that in mind, we put a lot of our effort into teaching people about loons and their needs and trying to keep these things from happening in the first place. And it's really in those areas where we have been able to create or encourage a culture of respect and appreciation. That's where loons have thrived in New Hampshire. We give talks as well, exhibits and educational presentations like this one, typically over 120 of them over the course of a year to various groups. We've even partnered with Swan Lake's Natural Science Center to give loon cruises on Swan Lake where we can get up pretty close, not too close, but pretty close and personal with these loons and talk about loons and their needs as well. But, you know, probably the most important educational work that we do happens one-on-one, you know, in the field, as our biologists are out there doing their work to help our loons. And typically what we don't want, you know, we want our biologists to engage with lake users, but what we don't want is for them to boat up to somebody and start to wag their finger and tell them all the things that they're doing wrong, right, about loons. So what we do is we give them these non-lead sinkers, right? And now we have a gift, right? Something to hand to people and engage them in conservation and hopefully turn them into advocates for loons on our lakes. We've also worked to educate our legislature. That has been a harder task at times, but there have been some notable successes there as well. And New Hampshire actually became the first state in the nation to ban the sale and the use of any sort of lead sinkers or jigs because of the data that we collected on the impacts of these things. Back in 2013, we had Governor Hassan at the Loon Center to sign Senate Bill 89, and that was a bill that closed a loophole in that current lead tackle law that was allowing some of these larger jigs that were still lethal to loons to continue to be sold and used in New Hampshire. And so as of 2016, we're very confident that we have a really good and protected protective rule in place, for loons, and that is, if you're using a lead sinker or a lead-headed jig that is 1 ounce or less in size, and that's the size most often consumed by loons, they just have to be made of something other than that, right? These other substances. So, all of this has barely scratched the surface of the work that we do at Loon Preservation Committee. I encourage everybody to go to our website, loon.org. At present, there's a whole page here about the different calls of loons and what they mean, along with clips of those different calls, a lot more information, and of course you can get to our loon webcam, which is now live. We're still trying to wait for those loons to get up on a nest, but you can get there through loon.org and watch a live loon on the webcam as well. So, and now on to some of the results, right, of that work. And so the good news is that in 2023, 2024 is kind of still being written, right? But the last year that we have full results for 2023, we had more than 4 times as many adult loons as we had back in 1975, these quiet, days when we began our work. So that's, as nice as it is to see a more or less, steadily increasing line there, we still have a ways to go, right? Because the carrying capacity, how many loons we should have, is probably somewhere in between these 2 lines. So even after close to 50 years of work, we're on the road to recovery, but we haven't, gotten to that full road of recovery yet. But if we go a layer deeper into these data, you get this one. This is the chicks surviving per territorial pair of loons per year. And this is an important graph because the red line here is 0.48 chicks surviving per pair per year. That's the number that we know from research done by the Loon Preservation Committee and other organizations. We know we need to hit that number as often as not if we want to maintain a stable population of loons in the Hampshire. And of course, we want to do more than just maintain. We want to continue to recover that population. Turns out that the years where we've seen really good growth in our loons have been, spans of years like right here, where we spent a good number of years well above that level. Recently, it's been harder to stay above that level. So our concern as we look at this graph is that as we continue to lose loons from natural causes or from lead sinkers or monofilament or any of those other issues, where are the chicks going to be coming from, to replace these birds? Right? And so one of the things that we've done is look at these various life stages, and what we found is that loons are continuing to come back from the ocean in the spring. They're continuing to pair up, continuing to lay eggs even, but those eggs it's harder to hatch those eggs as we go. So we began to look at loons and say, well, what are the factors that contribute to the breeding success and survival of loons? And one of the issues is there are a lot of them, right? So these loons, they live in these messy natural systems, and they're subject to these co-occurring, multiple stressors. It can be hard to tease out some of the influences that are happening. So this is a mathematical model based on LPC's data, and while we continue to try and refine this model to help us understand what's happening to our loons, there are a number of easy things that we can do. One of them is just to take these unhatched loon eggs and break them open and say, what's inside? And when we did that, we found some pretty disturbing things. And so the red line on this graph is the level of each of these contaminants that has been shown to affect the health and the survival of the reproductive success of other bird species. So we don't want to be anywhere close to this red line for any of these contaminants, right? And as you can see, we're well above that for many. So, and I won't go through all of these, but a few of them I do want to mention. So PBDEs. PBDEs are flame retardants. And the great thing about PBDEs is that they keep things from catching fire easily. So we use them everywhere, right? So you can find them probably in your own home. You're going to find PBDEs in your carpets, in your cushions, on your sofa. You'll find them in your television, in your stereo, in your laptop, in your projector. Kids' pajamas used to be loaded with PBDEs. And it said right on those pajamas, it said after 10 washes, these pajamas are no longer flame retardant. And that's because PBDEs tend not to bind chemically to the substrate on which they're applied. So where do they go? Right? Down the drain and then into our lakes, where they begin to affect our water. PFAS, right? In all the news now, and deservedly so, because the more we learn about this, the worse this stuff gets. But these are flame retardants. They're used in Gore-Tex and in some of these stain repellents. They're used in food containers, right, to keep grease and things from soaking through into the carpet, into the cardboard and things. And what we're finding is that at levels, we're finding these in our loon eggs at levels that are almost 3 times the levels that are known to harm other wildlife species, right? PCBs, our old friends, PCBs, we stopped making these in the 1970s, but they're still showing up in our loon eggs at levels more than 3 times the levels known to cause harm to other species. And that's because, taken together, everything, at least from the left-hand side of this graph, are known as POPs, persistent organic pollutants. Persistent because once they're in our environment, they tend to stay in it. It's very hard to get rid of. So that's why PFAS, specifically, they're referred to as forever chemicals, right? Because they're very hard to get rid of. So there's a real cautionary tale here about our effects on our environment and our wildlife. Another issue that we're dealing with, of course, is climate change, a warming climate. Loons are a northern species. They're very close to the southern edge of their breeding range here in New Hampshire. So we're actually placing temperature data loggers, into active loon nests to try and figure out, what effects temperatures are having on our loons. We've also, and here's our webcam. This is our first webcam. I think it was in 2014 or so. So this is the actual camera, and here is the actual loon nest that it was focused on. We knew this would be a great research tool. We decided to share it with the world as well, so we made this kind of a public thing as well. We put it onto our website and turned into a great educational tool as well. But we didn't think that we would actually save a pair of loons by doing this, but it turns out that we did, because on late one Friday night, a gentleman on our Facebook page, a gentleman from Missouri, of all places, right, said, "Hey, I think that loon that you've got up in your camera has monofilament line wrapped around its bill." And the next morning, early in the morning, we checked it out. Sure enough, it had got monofilament wrapped around, potentially deadly, to this loon, into the nest that it was incubating as well. So we went up, captured it right off the nest, removed the monofilament line, and popped right back on the nest. And a couple of days later, we had a little loon chick. So that's kind of nice. But if we want to recover a wildlife population, we have to increase our reproductive success, but we also have to avoid human-caused mortality of these birds. And here's where lead is king, right? The reason why I talk so much about lead fishing tackle is because it's overwhelmingly the largest single cause of loon deaths here in New Hampshire, right? So this is the reason why, I'm just going to say it again, in the dusty corner of your garage, as likely as not, there's an old tackle box from Grandpa, or from Dad or somebody, full of lead fishing tackle. Bring it to us. Bring it to the Loon Center. Bring it to any one of our things, and we will pay you money to get rid of that tackle and keep it out of our lakes and our lagoons and our wildlife. And then in 2007, we had something new happen. A bunch of loons that we found up on the Broads on Winnipesaukee, up on the ice. This is one of the lucky 5 that we found that were still alive when we found them. Another 17 had perished, because of exposure to the elements. I'm going to warn everybody, this is kind of a gruesome photo coming up, but here's John Cooley taking some measurements on a bunch of these frozen loons, and then we sent them off to Mark Gokris so that he could tell us what they had died of. And what Mark found was that 3 of these birds had swallowed lead sinkers or lead head. They were going to die. There was nothing that we could do to save them. But the other 14 of these birds were all apparently healthy until they had been frozen. But one thing that was in common was that they were all molting their flight feathers. And in loons, they molt all of their flight feathers at the same time, and they're supposed to do that while they're safe on the ocean, which is not going to freeze, right? At least not off the coast of New Hampshire here. The problem is that the winter of 2007 to 2008, we had record warm temperatures, and the Broads on Winnipesaukee stayed open. So even though something's probably telling these loons, there's probably a restlessness, they're probably saying, well, I should probably be migrating off to the ocean now, but on the other hand, the weather is warm, the water is open, the fishing is good, I'm going to stay a little while more. And by the time the ice finally did close in on them, They caught them right in the winter, in the middle of that wing feather mold, and they couldn't. Another consequence of global climate change. So this is an avian malaria parasite taken from a loon on Lake Ontario, way up north in New Hampshire. So here is, if not a tropical, certainly a warm weather disease that killed a loon, and not a loon, you know, on the border of Massachusetts. This is way north in New Hampshire, north of the Notches, which is an area that we hoped would be a refuge for loons for at least a little while from the effects of a warming climate. So because of these various things, we've added climate change, right, to that long list of stressors affecting loons. And on the other hand, and I'm wrapping up now, I know we're probably pretty close to time, right? On the other hand, there's a bunch of positive things happening for loons as well. That includes the research and the management and the education that we're doing at the Loon Preservation Committee, a number of great organizations working on shoreline habitat conservation and things, and also educating our decision makers, right, our legislators, to make good decisions regarding loons and other reasons. And so, you know, the question is, will all of this be enough? Will all of our efforts be enough to help loons cope with some of the negative consequences of our increasing human populations here? And so, to answer that, we took everything that we've been able to learn about loons, basic life history stuff, and the challenges facing the loons, and our ability to help loons cope with those challenges and forecast the future of our loon population. And when we did that, we found that, as with so many things, the future of loons in New Hampshire is not assured, but neither is it a lost cause. And so, so it really depends on how much we care about these loons and how much we're willing to help. So, at this point, you may be asking, right, how you do that. And the good news is, there are ways. Remember I talked about 8 or 9 field biologists and 350 lakes throughout New Hampshire? That's a lot of lakes for each one of those field biologists. So we really do count on our volunteers to help us understand what's happening with our loon population in New Hampshire. Now, there's a bunch of different ways that you can do that. So our loon census, coming right up, July 20th, every year, third Saturday of July, for 1 hour between 8 and 9 in the morning, we get as many people as we can out on lakes throughout the state of New Hampshire counting loons. And that gives us a snapshot in time of our loon population. Right? You can also watch loons through the course of the season. So the first time you see loons back on your lake, we would love to know about that. The first time you see a loon on the nest, the first time you see chicks, whether those chicks survive, you know, until the end of the summer, that is all great information, and we'd love to hear from you about any of that. You can educate lake users, you can become an advocate for loons, you can even, if you're so inspired, become a member, and I just happen to have some membership brochures with me. And so, you know, so there's still much work to be done. And the work that we do at the Loon Preservation Committee, the effects of that go far beyond loons, and far beyond New Hampshire. Loons are a sentinel of environmental quality. They're an indicator of the health of our lakes and our ponds. So they're scientifically important, and they have this wide public appeal. And that's why loons have found themselves at the focal point of so many of these environmental issues. And that means that if we can save loons, then we can save a lot of other species that depend on the same clean water and quiet places. So we like to think that at the same time as we have been working to preserve and recover our loon population, we've also been working to promote or encourage an environmental ethic. And that's something that's going to help not only loons, but other wildlife and even people and the economy of New Hampshire. Because after all, it's a large part of the reason why a lot of people choose to live here or to visit. So the hope is that the end results of all of our efforts will be a bright future for loons in New Hampshire, and I prefer to think of this as my sunrise. So that's the end of my presentation. I would love to answer any questions if we have still some time that folks have about things. Could we bring up the lights, do you think? That's great. Thank you, Kelly. And as we answer questions, I have 2 things to hand out. One is, so these are this is non-lead fishing tackle. So if you fish, if you know somebody who fishes, please take 1 or a few of these and spread the word, please. I'm using these instead of the old lead in the tackle box could one day save a loon. And as promised, I also have a few brochures that talk a little bit more about the Loon Preservation Committee and the work that we're doing for loons in the future. So, anybody have any questions? Yes?
What are the significance of the red eyes?
Oh, the red eyes, significance? Yeah, so this is a great question. So if you'll notice, the chicks have brown eyes, right? They're beautiful chocolate brown, kind of color. And so the first time that loons get those red eyes is about 26 months of age when they first molt into that breeding plumage, the alternate plumage. And the interesting thing is that we used to think, because of those bright red eyes, if anybody dives, is a scuba diver or skin diver, as soon as you dive more than like 10 feet down in the water, all of that red light is filtered out, right? And everything turns blue and green down there. So we used to think, oh, well, if we see the loon's eyes as red, that means the red light is reflected, which means all that good blue and green light that they really need when they're at depth is coming through. Then we realized that the pupil of the loon the loon's eyes is black, which means it lets all light in equally, just like ours. But what does happen is, if you're a loon and you're 10 feet underwater, that red eye fades to black. So you've got a black eye against a black, head. And if you're a fish and you see a loon kind of, cruising by, you can't tell that that eye is focused on you, and you might hesitate for just a second, and it's probably all that loon needs to make you a meal, right? So it's a secondary sex characteristic. Eyes have to be some color, but we think that there may be some advantage, in terms of the camouflage, because if all that red light is filtered out, it just looks black underneath. Yeah.
Well, I guess I also have the question of other birds that I know of that have red eyes. So are they like the only bird in the region that has evolved that way?
No, some of the grebes, have red eyes as well. Some others, and some reptiles, will have red eyes as well. So, and reptiles, birds, closely related, and things as well. So again, I've heard some people say, well, there got to be some color. Why not red? But it could just be that secondary sex characteristic as well. Because the red eye is a signal that I'm a loon, I'm in breeding, I'm mature, I'm in breeding form, and here I am. Yeah. So it's not, right, so there's a number of options, but ultimately, the short version is we don't know, that there's some speculation. Any other questions about loons? Let's dive inside.
So I was just wondering, I was thinking we suggest everybody go counting them on, for a census. Yet some of the loons are just diving, so, for such a long period of time.
Yes.
I mean, how do you know that you're catching all of them, number one, you're counting all of them. And number two, how many loon families would be on a body of water?
Yes.
And will they be recounted more than once?
Sure. So these are both great questions. And one of the things about loons is there's this whole mythology that that loons can dive for stay underwater for 12 minutes and dive in and go for a mile underwater and things. Most loon dives last less than a minute, and they're in fairly shallow water. But what can happen if a loon thinks that it's being followed or wants to get away from you, it can actually dive and put just the very tip of its bill above water, take a little sip of air, and then sink down. Right? So it's the bane of loon researchers everywhere. But a relaxed loon actually spends a lot of time on the surface, and they can just kind of be lazing around. So if you're scanning, one scan of a lake doesn't do it, but if you're on a body of water for an hour, chances are pretty good that at some point you're going to see that loon come out and be able to say, gotcha, and I can catch you at this point. Right? And so that was the one. And as for, typically, up to about 100 acres or so, you'll usually only have one pair of loons on a lake, and sometimes even a much larger lake. If you have a round lake like this, it's 300 acres, you're probably still only going to have one pair of loons. But take that same lake and pinch it in the middle, because it's got a peninsula, or a screen of islands or something, and you can easily have a pair on either side. So they're very visual birds, but as long as they're not kind of in their face and having to look at another pair of them, they can they'll go to the opposite sides.
Will they potentially, I'm thinking of the Hampstead area, where they had Shop Pond, and I had heard that they would nest over on Shop Pond and then migrate over to the big pond.
Yes, yeah, which is Great, so that's interesting, and we didn't know this until about 20 years ago, but some loons that are nesting, so less than 100 acres of lake, it becomes a little harder for loons to make a go of it, because they don't have enough of the fish resources and things of that nature. Now, they can do that, and one of the ways that they can make it work is they can actually save a complex of smaller lakes. And so what they'll do is if there's one small lake with a good nesting site on it, but it's not really enough to maintain 2 adult loons and 2 chicks, the adults will actually defend another lake close by, and they'll use that lake to feed themselves, and they'll kind of husband the resources of that smaller lake for the chick. It's harder to do that. Loons tend to be a little bit less successful, but some of them can make it work.
That's
Yeah.
what they heard from the
Yeah.
locals.
Yes.
Yeah, and then,
Yeah.
they would feed over on Big Island Pond.
Right. Right, yeah. Yeah, so for the longest time, we didn't quite know what was happening with that. And then if you get into larger lakes, you can have 2 or 3 pairs. Winnipesaukee, historically, we think probably 50 pairs of loons, all kind of in their separate little bays and things. These days, we're lucky to get up to about 30.
How about Squam Lake?
Yeah, Swan Lake typically has like 14 pairs, give or take, yeah, 13 to 15 pairs there. Yes?
How well represented is the loon, penguin, et cetera, family fossil record?
Oh, that's a great question. So there are loon-like birds that go back 80 million years, but that could be kind of a convergent, evolution and things. But there are birds that are recognizably like our modern loons that go back 20 or 22 million years in the fossil record. So that's quite a decent history.
And for reference, like Archaeopteryx was like 160 million or something, if I
Yes,
remember.
boy, oh boy. I'm not sure, but that's probably, that sounds about right, to me, yeah. So these loons, right, they don't go back quite so far as that maybe. And the interesting thing, right, is if you have a slightly older field guide, like this Peterson guide, loons are the first bird in this guide. And that's because these guides are arranged phylogenetically, so the birds that we think of as the most primitive birds are at the beginning, and the most recently evolved birds, the warbirds, the sparrows, are at the end. But within the newer field guides, loons are actually closer to the middle. Because as we've continued to increase our knowledge and dug up more fossils and things like that, we found that there are other birds that have a history that goes back at least as far as loons, and in some cases further, yeah. So it's one of these outdated notions that, loons are the most primitive of all birds because of, this field guide, which is only about 30 years old. So our knowledge of the histories of these birds is constantly changing. It has really pretty profoundly changed, even within the last 20 years. Yeah, it's all kind of evolving, right? There's so much that we don't know. It's pretty humbling. Oh, yes.
You talked a lot about the loon pairs and the loon families. What happens to loons that don't end up pairing up over the summer?
Yes.
Is that all that common, or?
Yes, it is. See, these are great questions. About 15% of our adult loon population is unpaired loons, and they tend to get a bad rap, right? People will call them rogue loons because they'll come in and they'll try and make trouble, because they could be young loons, or they could be loons that lost a territorial battle with another loon, got kicked out of their territory, and now they're looking for a territory that they can take over. What would be great is if they went to an empty lake, and set up a new territory there, and some loons will do that, but if there's a pair of loons on a lake and they have a chick, on that lake, loons that are flying over or loons that are kind of landing will take note of that, and next year they may come back and try and wrestle that territory away from that other loon, because by definition, if it's got a chick, it's good territory, right? So they become targeted, for these incursions. So that's when you can get a lot of posturing and a lot of fighting, in between loons as they're trying to wrestle those territories up. And sometimes they be fatal, for a loon. Often, usually they're not. There's all of these kind of ritualized behaviors like wing rowing and things of that nature. So they're kind of like feats of strength. So a loon that comes in, if you have a pair of loons, if there's an intruding loon that comes into that territory, if it's a female, then the female of that pair will come out to meet it. If it's a male, the male will come out to meet it, and they'll do these ritualized behaviors. So again, this wing rowing and things, that's the female loon of this pair saying, look, I I know that you're intruding into this territory. If you think you can take me, I'm strong, I'm not injured, I could do this all day, you don't want to mess with me, keep looking, you know, for another territory. So that's the point of all of these ritualized behaviors that they see. And if that other loon doesn't get the point, then they can come to blows, and like I said, it can turn into a fatal battle. So, nature red and tooth and claw. Any other questions? Well, it's been great. Thank you all for coming out. It's been great to talk with you about this. There's a whole bunch of stuff here. Please do help yourself. Any of this information. Great.
All right. Thank you so much, Harry, for joining us tonight. For everyone joining us for the planetarium show, it's going to be in about 10 minutes. Plenty of time to go to the bathroom if you need to, get some water. Our colleague Wallace will be running the show for you tonight. She does a really wonderful job with her tonight's skies, so I'm sure you will all have a wonderful time. But thank you so much for joining us, and if you have any further questions,
Yes.
we'll be able to answer those for you. But thank you all again for joining us tonight.